Oh, good morning or afternoon.
Good morning.
Hello, David. How are you?
Hey there. Looks like my room's much better than your room right now.
Oh, yeah, that's probably fair. I do, my biggest problem is honestly like sitting outside. I don't
Uh-huh.
get anything done because it's like, oh, there's a bird, there's a squirrel climbing that tree, there's something to look at, and yeah,
Oh,
it's very distracting.
I'm staring at my house's sidings, which is not very distracting. So,
So
but
I get
but the background looks great.
it is a nice background.
Hi, all. How are you?
Hello.
Morning, or wait, afternoon for you, Yotam.
Yeah, afternoon, evening, even.
I'm telling people say from your own zone because otherwise you have to say 24 different answers. So, so for me it's good morning to everybody from Northern Virginia.
Almost afternoon for you.
Almost afternoon, and I will say that not every day is like today, but when we get a good day, it's nice to show it off. And you'll see me in the closet or in front of a closet most of the rest of the time.
And that's fair because in what in approximately 1 week you'll have 100% humidity. And-
I won't know because I'm going to be on vacation next week,
there you go.
so I'm going to the beach.
That's
Although
what I
I will.
always love how like DC has 2 weeks of acceptable weather, and then the rest is horrible.
Uh, well, DC, yes, because that's a swamp. But we have more than 2 weeks of acceptable weather in Northern Virginia. But I do agree, middle of the summer is not one of those days.
Yeah.
Tennessee, it's nice, but it gets so humid here at certain parts of the summer that it's just not as much fun to be outside.
Okay. Just quick clarification, Josh. This S-bomb measure thing. This is a proposal from you.
It's just something I've started working on. I don't even know if I'd call it a proposal at this point.
Okay. I mean, it's under your own repo. I mean, you can do whatever you want in your own repo.
That is correct.
But so this is more of an awareness. I'm just trying to understand what the bullet is that we're going to be talking about.
I don't know. I don't know what we're going to talk about. It's part of the fun.
Part of the
And
fun.
this will be
Okay.
really light, I suspect, just because there's a ton of stuff going on this week. There's RSA and some other conferences, and
Yeah.
June
Yeah.
is nuts this year because I think like everything that got canceled for the last 2 years decided June was when it would be. And I mean, heck, what in 2 weeks, all the Linux Foundation stuff goes down.
Right. Including OpenSSF Day. Everybody's welcome.
Yep.
I'm going to be giving a presentation on OpenSSF Day in 2 weeks, so come see. What will it say? I'm still working on that myself. So.
It doesn't have to be done till like an hour before you present. It's fine.
Definitely.
No, no, I try to have actual content ready before then. There are people who can wing it well. I find I need more time than that.
That's fair.
I do actually have a generic deck. I imagine a lot of you folks, folks who do a lot of presentations, I have to talk. Here it is. Don't go. But if you want new content, I actually have to like sit and think and stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah. All right, we can get cracking on this. There's not a lot of people here, and that's fine. We can probably make it quick. I gotta find my agenda. Uh,
Yeah. If you haven't put your name in the attendees list, please add.
Yep, thank you. All right, I'll paste the agenda in the chat for anyone who hasn't seen it. There we go. Okay. The first thing says, how do the work streams affect this working group? Did someone here put that in the agenda? I have a suspicion
I
Vicky did
didn't.
that. And that's fine. We'll move it to next time. I'm gonna create an entry for the next meeting, just because I don't think
Okay.
we're gonna get to a lot of this today.
I think Brian Bellendorf wanted to work on something like that, but then after the big gathering, he decided to get pretty sick. I think
Okay,
he's
the
gotten better.
next,
but-
oh, that's right.
Yeah, I think what I've been telling folks is every working group think about which work streams or which parts of those at least make sense, so at least we can get the thinking going. I think their goal is to eventually have a broader kind of through, but you know what? Let's just start talking about it and thinking about it, and that'll give Brian more material to work with than help coordination.
I mean, so that's interesting you say that, David, because I feel that feels backwards to me to say, hey, working groups, which work stream do you want? Versus saying work streams, where do you fit into this puzzle? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So
Are those two statements different?
I mean, yes, because look, I'll be just completely frank. Like most of these working groups have meetings. And saying, oh, I do that. That's our group. Like, is it? Are you actually doing anything? Whereas I feel like the work streams have very specific funding requirements and goals. And so saying, oh, this group that only has meetings, what the hell are you going to do? You know what I mean? Whereas I think if a stream wants to show up to a meeting and say, we would like to partner with you and here are our expectations, I think that's very different. I'll let Eric. Eric, do you have a comment?
Yeah, well, I mean, I know some of the working groups are actually talking about these work streams, right? And certainly David's in all of them, so he, or at least the majority. So, I mean, like Crow from the last, the best practices, right? One of the breaking out into a SIG specifically around stream one for the education components is one example. So, and certainly there are others, but yeah, I think there is some logical tie-in from the working group to these, because coming up to the actual meeting of the work a couple of weeks ago, the working groups were actively working on these projects, or at least certain people in a number of them. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but I agree that you can certainly not be in a working group and work on these work streams. I just think you're other than the TAC meeting, which kind of sits over everything and discusses these. If you're only going to one or two working groups, how else are you going to hear about it if it's not discussed? So I do think it should be at least loosely tied, and it should be some updates in each one of these variant working groups would be ideal, my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean the TAC definitely needs to be coordinating and overseeing and all that the stuff the TAC's supposed to do. I do think it makes it, like you mentioned, the best practices working group. They've been doing education stuff since they were founded, so it kind of makes sense that that stream is at least do some of the things. I don't think we want to say, the working group does everything in that stream necessarily, or in multiple working groups, because the goal of that document was more to identify what needs doing. We very expressly avoided the who, because it's hard to get even agreement on what needs doing, and the who does them is yet another step. So in order to get some agreements on what needs doing, we avoided the who does that in the short term. But obviously, to get things done, we have to answer that question. And I think the answer is it varies.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I do think it's fair to say, hey, at least for the working groups, if there's parts that you think you can contribute to helping and working on something, raise that, start the discussion. Um, you know, uh, I just don't want to wait forever a lot of the folks who are involved in actually solving these problems, who know how to solve these problems, are in these meetings.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, we'll
Maybe.
see.
Okay.
I don't have a ton of faith in the working groups accomplishing a lot of this. Just that's my honest opinion of the matter. Because I don't think, none of us have free cycles as it is, and this is a ton of new work. So we will see.
Right.
And,
Right.
and we're not gonna solve it here. I mean, there's what, like 6 people here, 7?
Okay.
Anyway, I mean, I think it's fair though, and this is something yeah, we'll see. All right. David, do you want to go next? Because I have a suspicion your topic will be quick.
My topic will be quick. So I've been working on some other stuff. So I mean, I am definitely struggling with the hey, got too many things on plate. But for the false positive suppression specification, I mean, I think the big issue was that we were focusing on security tools, and then the question is, hey, do we want to add general linters? If we do, then of course there's the argument about, there's some arguments on why you don't want to suppress things, which is which focuses more on linters. Um, I guess I don't have a strong dog in the fight. I'd originally envisioned this being for security specific tools, but hey, and by the way, I do thank all the folks who've added all these different tools in the list. That is fantastic.
Indeed.
So there has been a lot of, so I'd say I haven't, but other folks have, and I should note that that specifically the all the additions for the tools. So that's really my problem, not the doc problem. Okay. All right. So one is I've been distracted to return to it. We have many tools now documented. Thank you, everyone. Okay. And should we include linters, non-security, in scope? So I'm going to open that up to the floor because I'm not sure we have not answered that. Originally, it was only for the security tools, but there are good arguments for it. Frankly, I think there's arguments either way. Does anyone have a strong preference they want to raise?
I mean, my view of this is just it's open source. If a project wants to be a part of this, great. And if they're a linter, great. Like if they don't, great, I guess, David, let me ask you, have you had any buy-in from any of the other scanner projects out there?
Haven't contacted them so far.
Okay.
It's been a trying to document what people already do, and you'll notice that a lot of I won't say I'm sure I can't say all, but many tools have a mechanism for disabling things. But that's actually part of the challenge is that how it does them. It varies, which means you have to insert a comment for each one, and maybe that's okay. But
I mean, I don't think I would say that's okay, just
right,
for what
and
it's.
that's my concern also is that every time you add a new tool, now you got to redo all these disabling rules. Is the
Yep,
problem,
that's right.
and that really discourages adding tools, which is kind of the goal of this group. I think is to encourage the improvement of tools, use of tools.
No, I do have a technical question that I don't know the answer to. So you add the comments that say something like skip the next line. do the tools skip the next code line, or like if you have multiple comments, are there tools that get confused? If you know what I mean, like skip the next line, like line's a comment, oops, skipped it, like, you know?
Well, actually, I would argue that that should be okay. Skipping comments shouldn't count as a line that you're.
Well, right, but do they? Like, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure Flaw Finder does, but I haven't done the analysis of all the way through.
Okay.
I would assume that since, these are different implementations, different people behind them, a different logic, it's safe to say that probably some do, some don't, and some do other weird things that we'll encounter once we'll actually dig in.
Yeah. Now, one thing that you can probably consider an error, I realized after I started writing this spec, I think once you say Flaw Finder ignore, it will basically disable the next warning. But that warning may be many lines later, and I think it just eliminates the next warning, no matter how far down it is, which isn't right really either, actually, because if you inserted an ignore line and then later change the code to fix it, you don't want the ignorer to trigger many lines later. I'm gonna have to check. I have. It's been a while since I've looked at the Flaw Finder code for that, but it's possible that a tool, whether or not Flaw Finder does it, I wouldn't be surprised if some other tool does it. We probably ought to check for that because it should be the next code line that you're ignoring, not the next warning 3,000 lines later. Yotam?
Yeah, I think that one of the common problems with the skip logic, or whatever you want to call it, is sometimes it's silent, and then you can have, for example, some kind of file you put in the directory that tells the scanner ignore this directory, and someone along the way forgot that file is there, and it simply is not aware of any vulnerabilities that sit in that tree structure. So I think maybe something that we want to promote is some kind of guidelines for how to report it, to some kind of transparency. Like there's a difference between, you said there are 0 vulnerabilities, and there are 0 vulnerabilities, but there are 5 that were skipped because you silenced them.
Okay, there's nothing in here about excluding files. This is a per message within the file, but your point's still well taken. That hey, report. I probably should note the report that Flaw Finder does, where it says I ignored this many, but this many found, this many were ignored. But you're absolutely right, and
Yeah.
we could certainly add. I'm going to mention that here. In tool reports, note how many reports were suppressed in a final report. Okay. Sir Arno.
Yes, hi everyone. I just wanted to actually talk a little bit more at the higher level, the point you guys were talking about, the adoption of this kind of standard, so to speak. I mean, I'm an old standards guy. I've participated in many standards effort, and I always tell people, to be successful in establishing a standard is absolutely key to have the critical players in that field involved and get their buy-in from the get-go. If we don't ensure we have that, then it's kind of a waste of time, I'm afraid. Because, and I think the other thing is, the challenge here is that I don't know that the people who are producing those tools that would be the implementers have a big incentive to implement this, because I mean, it's a kind of vendor lock-in type of situation, right? They don't have much incentive to help you move from one tool to another. They'd rather you get stuck with their tool. And so this is, a case where it's going to be very difficult, I think, to get people to buy in. Typically, it works when you have like a big player and everybody else is kind of losing out, And so you can rally the losers, so to speak, and say, okay, let's get together, fix that problem, and then we have a chance against the market leader. But otherwise, if everybody is kind of the same level, they're all hoping they can get the biggest market share, it's very, very difficult. So I'm sorry, I think I wouldn't put too much effort until you can secure some level of commitment from some of the tool providers. And just as a last piece of information, this is a specification that will be implemented by tools, and you would want to use the community specification framework to develop that, to get the right IP protection.
Yeah,
That's a
fair.
side stuff. Just so you know, it's much easier to do it from the get-go than trying to do it after, once people have started contributing.
Okay. Good point. Yeah, your critical players one is unfortunately a fair one. Not sure how to address that. I mean, I manage Flaw Finder, but I would not claim that's the market leading tool there. Can I take that and think hard about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't expect you to just say, oh, okay, easy enough. I'll go fix that. I'm just, this is a fair warning. I'm just letting you know, in my opinion, that's my experience. And always question when people embark in standards effort where they don't have critical mass.
Well, certainly, I think there's always a challenge of, hey, is it the right problem? But you're right. Critical mass is another key part of it.
Well, I mean, look, part of the reason the OpenSSF exists is to help shepherd things like this along, right? I mean, the history of security is throwing our hands in the air and declaring problems too hard. Like, if we don't try, we fail automatically. So I think we should also be mindful of that.
But I don't think it has to. The next step has to be, oh, fail. But I think the next step does need to be then, if that's the point, try to find a way to gain enough critical mass.
And
exactly. You have I think this is a solvable problem, and there is nothing wrong in trying to address it. But I think before you spend too much time into figuring out all the technical details, you have to look at who is going to implement it. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. The world is full of standards that are just collecting dust. And sometimes users have gone through the trouble of defining the solution that they would love to have, right? And it's just being ignored by the people who should implement those standards, and it's a very frustrating exercise.
Yeah, it's writing the requirement spec, but you're not paying the maker to do that, or you're paying the maker regardless of whether or not they do it. So why would they do that? Yeah, now thankfully a number of these are open source projects, so I think if it might not be that challenging to connect to some of them, but it's a fair point. Need to find a way to to identify and connect with some of them.
anything else?
Yeah, if
Dan?
they're open source, you could go as far as saying, well, eventually you might have to, do the work to get those tools to support it. Do like a pull request where you say, okay, this is what it will take to support this standard, please, and then maybe they will do it.
Anything else, David?
Nope.
All right, cool. And then we'll move on to the link I put in there. So I created I talked long ago about wanting to build a project to measure security tools and not measure for goodness, but rather measure in a way that shows what tools do well or what they don't necessarily do well. Because I know a lot of the tools that exist, they often don't realize what their weak spots are or what their blind spots are. And my favorite example of this is, I mean, we have Yadam here where Resilient did that nice blog post about the tools that can detect log4j. And it was one of those things that a bunch of the tool makers were like, oh, well, we can fix that. And they added a bunch more ticks in their boxes of what they detect. And I think this is something we need. Well, I should back up first. I think there's value in doing something like this, but I started putting something together over the weekend. It's just a Git repo. Like this is something I'm working on in my personal time at the moment. If we want to work on it as part of this working group, great. If not, whatever, great too. But it was shocking to me how hard most of these tools are to actually run. Like I started trying to figure out like, ooh, I'm going to run some SBOM generators. And I thought I'd start with SPDX. And like, I can't even get half these tools to run because they're like freaking Rube Goldberg contraptions that need a ton of infrastructure and someone who actually knows what they're doing, which was shocking to me. I did not expect that. And so I think like this is part of what is going to hinder adoption, especially in the area of SBOM. And this kind of ties itself into the SBOM everywhere work stream, which is a whole nother topic that I don't want to talk about right now. But like, I thought the problem with adoption was going to be blind spots in accuracy and data. But I think at this point, the adoption problem is just these tools are a nightmare to actually run at all. And so I think this is one of those instances of like doing some of the work actually really uncovers where the pain points are for the people using it. So I don't have a lot else to say. I mean, I'm happy to answer questions or if someone has comments or anything, that's great. But otherwise, it's just kind of something I'm going to dabble with for a while in my free time and see where it goes.
Yeah, I have not tried to run a lot of these tools myself, although I very much
Don't.
want. Yeah,
Don't.
Okay. Um, so, but of course, I think we all understand that the dependencies, obviously, I mean, most software today is mostly the dependencies. So, having these SBOMs is stinking, has value. So, um, there's got to be a way to fund or do something to make these things much easier to install and use. um I mean, at least for the SPDX tool, I imagine that Kate Stewart would be very interested in trying to make that better.
Well, that's the
um
thing. There isn't an SPDX tool, right?
no,
There's
well, there's multiple tools, I know that.
right. And it's I went to the SPDX website and went to their tools page. Now it is conceivable that their tools page is out of date, but again, that's like a
I
whole
think it
nother
is.
problem then.
Yeah, I think that's a problem. Yeah,
And yeah,
I don't think they list some of the wider tools, which is weird, but that was true a while back. I don't know if that's true anymore.
I don't know. And again, this is just part of the journey, right?
Yeah.
Is learning all of this stuff because I didn't know before I started trying to figure this out.
But the idea of this is to jointly collect information, first of all, right? Step number one. Or what's your plan, your intention here?
So my original thought was to identify kind of blind spots, SBOM, I mean, specifically SBOM in this case, but I would like to see many other security projects doing tools, I should say, doing similar things. But initially I was thinking of just capturing blind spots in SBOMs, where SBOM scanners, where you could say like this scanner, I mean, my favorite example is the Resilient blog post. I won't post again, but like they looked for log4j. And there is, in fact, I checked in the Palantir test suite into this repo I created just so I don't lose it again, where there's like all these weird instances of log4j like packaged up in weird ways. And it's not meant to be maliciously hidden because that's, I think, outside the scope of anything we want to do, but just like this is how Java is distributed. And some tools found a lot of it, some tools didn't find any of it. And I think that was my original thought, was starting to build a corpus of tests that you could run like an SBOM scanner against and say, like, this scanner is really good at finding Python stuff. This scanner is really good at finding Ruby stuff, whatever. And then also using that as a way for projects to say, like, we suck at finding Java jars in jars. Like, we can fix that with a patch or whatever. But at this point, just running the damn tools is the challenge. They're really hard to use. I was floored by how difficult nearly all these tools are to run. And that was not my expectation at all. So I think my first step is just going to be identifying the projects that, because obviously there has to be limited scope, but identifying the projects that I think have the most promise. And at this point, obviously this is just me, so it's literally what I think. But if it was a larger group, then it would be a group decision. But and then working with them to make sure like it's easy to use and we're setting it up correctly, and then creating a data set to go out, you know, to run them against. But yeah, I think I'm shocked by what I've learned so far. And now granted, I spent a couple hours over the weekend. It's not like I've invested enormous amounts of time into this, but they're like, these tools are hard to run. And so then I think what I was just telling David a minute ago was like, this is going to be the problem with SBOM, is going to be adoption if the tools are all garbage, which at the moment, I shouldn't say garbage, garbage is too strong. If the tool, if the entry point into this tooling requires like a full-time person to set up and run, that's going to be too much friction for most organizations, I think, right? And so they're just going to be like, well, I can't do it, I'm done.
Yeah, okay, agree. I like the idea. And I think, as you mentioned previously, that ties directly into the workstream 9 goals, kind of. Yeah, I was mainly wondering about the to-do in the repository that you posted. Because if you ask for folks who could help out, and it says basically identify more SBOM scanners and all that stuff. So that seemed to be more like an information gathering exercise primarily as step one, and then take it from there.
Yeah, it's definitely information gathering. And the to-do is like just crap I thought of. I'm not going to say there's any rigor or process behind it. This project is 100% like stuff Josh thought of on Sunday afternoon. Like, that's the definition of it.
Is that a badge, like in general?
It should be.
Okay.
Josh, FYI, a while ago, I wrote down a couple of SBOM generators I'd heard of, and so I pasted it into the notes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
This is not a complete list. I noticed. Well, if you couldn't find SIF, there's a different problem.
Yeah, I got that one. I got that one. We're good with that. And
all right, and I saw Turn. And there's SBOM, SPDX SBOM generator, and there's a Kubernetes one. There may be others. I don't know.
And I guarantee there are. I know there are. It's just part of, and again, this is part of the adoption challenge, is how do we even find this stuff? You know, because it's not easy to do today.
Yeah.
Charles, your hand is up.
Yes, I just noticed that on the GitHub page that you were mentioning the Cyclone DX output format as well, but I didn't see any of the Cyclone DX tools that are listed on their tool center.
I haven't made it to them yet.
Just checking.
Yeah, I'm not ignoring them on purpose. Actually, for what it's worth, I know the Cyclone DX has a Git repo, well, many Git repos. With their tooling is easy to run, and I've run some of their stuff before, but I decided I'd start with SPDX because I've just never run any of the SPDX tools, and now I know why I've never run any of the SPDX tools.
You ran into the challenges I ran into in the past. I can't find anything that actually generates good SPDX output, so I just use Cyclone.
Well, there's that aspect, but even just getting the friggin' tools to run. Like I ran Fossey last night, and I was waiting for my laptop to explode because the fan was so loud. And then the scan crashed eventually, so it was fine.
Fossologies?
Or Pathology, yeah, that one.
But so can I ask, I haven't tried those tools. I mean, what's your expectation, Josh? You would just basically, well, you install the tool somehow, and then you point it to a directory or repository, and it just does its thing and produce an SBOM for that?
So for what it's worth, most of these tools don't even really have installation instructions that can be followed by humans. Like there's no getting started. It's your typical open source project where it's just like a smattering of information spread across the repository in a way that if you're not a part of the group, you literally can't decipher. And that is a bug, right? Like that's a bug we should file and say like, you have no getting started instructions. How do I run your project?
Now,
And
Fossology very much does have an install
theirs
and a
isn't
Docker
bad, yeah,
image.
but I ran theirs. That's the thing, right? I could, because they have a Docker container. I could run the Docker container, it ran, and then it ran for a very long time and made my laptop make a lot of noise. And then it crashed, which with no error message. But and that's the thing, right? Some of these have some getting started instructions, some of the, I forget which one. There was one I tried running that like there were getting started instructions and I just couldn't get it to work. And I assume they changed something, but they didn't update their instructions. And again, like that's a bug. Those should be filed. And eventually
Completely agree.
we will get there. But at this point, I just want to like identify stuff and see what it does and tinker more than I want to reach out. Because obviously we all know once you reach out to an open source project and start filing bugs, it becomes a generous amount of effort to be, I think, a responsible community member in that regard. Because I also don't want to like swoop in, drop a bug that's like, hey, you're getting started instructions are terrible, and then run away. Like that's not good either, you know.
You say eventually it will happen. Maybe it won't for some of those projects, but then they'll kind of disappear because those that do provide the right instructions will take over.
I think so. Right. Exactly. And part of it too is like how many of these instructions are dead. There's a couple I saw that hadn't had commits in like 2 years. I mean, there's been a lot of work on SBOMs in the last 2 years. So I suspect anything that hasn't been updated in 2 years, if it runs, it's not going to generate what I want. And so, I mean, that's part of it too, is just figuring out like what's alive, what's dead, what should be dead. You know, it's going to be many different layers. And again, like this is part of the, I think the treat in working on projects like this is like, there's so much I don't even know I don't know. And as I work on it, I learn so many things that I didn't even imagine. So anyway, yeah, it's just, I would say it's purely for awareness at this point that I bring it up. If anyone wants to help, like great, you know, send pull requests or whatever, I'll happily take them. But otherwise, this is just something I have interest in. And I think I would love to see this group take it on, but I'm also not going to demand it or force it on anyone. And I don't think we're at a point yet where I can have an honest conversation and claim it's a project.
Okay, I've that's on my do list, but I haven't done it, so I can't tell you more.
What's on your
Myself.
do list?
Using all these different tools.
Yeah.
I actually didn't have much trouble running the SPDX SBOM generator. My problem was that it was for Ruby libraries, and I was running on a Ruby application, so it didn't.
I see. So it didn't pick, see like this, like that's a
didn't pick
great
it up.
example, David. That's exactly
Right.
what I'm talking about. Like
Right.
having the ability to say, hey, SPDX SBOM generator. And in fact, this didn't turn up in my list of going through the SPDX tools. And it looks like this one looks like it's not terrible. So
Yeah. Now I will say that the now I'm going to call you out, Josh. But I did file a bug report.
good. I mean, that's great. That's perfect.
Now I don't think they fixed it, but because I think they weren't primarily Ruby folks, so it was a what? So,
And
but that's I mean
exactly
that's
it, though.
okay. But at least
Right.
it's in their list.
Right. And exactly. And I'm even comfortable with projects saying we don't care and we don't ever want to fix this. Like that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah, well, I mean they haven't said that, but you know, but yeah, you're right. If they say, hey, that's not out of scope for our project,
right.
I would say fine, then just make that clear. But yeah,
exactly.
obviously everybody has to make scope decisions. Yeah, I guess I do agree with you that.
Yep.
I would say I would add document, but as long as you add document, yeah, I mean no software can do everything. Don't
Right,
look at it.
exactly. And like the SBOM world is huge. And so everything is going to have to do something well and not other things. And I think part of this, I'd love to be able to say, like, you need a Ruby SBOM generator. Here are the SBOM generators that scan Ruby. Here are the SBOM generators that don't. And then I know, don't look at this stuff because I don't need that, right? I need this over here. And like,
Or even
today,
even more complicated. Like in this case, it does scan Ruby, but it's assuming it's a library, not an application.
right?
But I mean, the statement still stands. It's a little more subtle, but that's
Yeah,
okay. I
right,
mean, it's. Whoops, Yotam.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I actually, as a follow-up to the research that Josh, I'm doing a similar research that focuses on to the vulnerability scanners, because the most vulnerability scanners rely on metadata that they get from package managers, similar to an SBOM.
Yep.
And Sift and Gripe is a good example for that. So I think like the insights that could come out of this research could also apply to a lot of vulnerability scanners that probably will have some of the gaps we'll discover in those SBOM tools of things that they miss, and hence miss vulnerabilities that exist. So yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's a really good point. But I'm also going to be very particular about scope. Like that is more scope than I'm willing to take on at this time. So I'm completely ignoring vulnerabilities and those scanners. But someday I would love to see a similar project where there's an open project everyone can contribute to, and then and focusing on vulnerability scanners. Because I think, again, like it's the same boat. Some vulnerability scanners do certain things really well and some of them don't. And like, what are those things? I have no idea.
Yeah, just as a quick anecdote, like I ran 20 containers and took 4 scanners, and out of those 20, only 3 had reported the same number of vulnerabilities, and even the 3 that were identical in the number of vulnerabilities, they weren't the same vulnerabilities. Like they had one missing from that one and the different one that is present in another one. So the number is the same, but those are different vulnerabilities. So yeah, so no consistency for 4 scanners, and that's so far. Like I assume as soon as I'll check a few more, there'll be, and some of them are like hundreds compared to like tens. Like the gaps are enormous. So
Yep.
Yeah. Just
now.
Yeah.
I will say there's 2 pieces to that research I think you're talking about. There's I will say the SBOM scan where it's trying to identify the artifacts, but then there's also the fact that our vulnerability data is trash. It's all prose. It's very hard to parse by machines. And so when you have like one scanner goes through the NVD data, it goes through the GitHub data, and it does its best to untangle it all, but it gets a lot of it wrong because we can't parse it all. There's too much for humans already, and we're not nearly catching all the vulnerability information. So that's a different problem, which is much harder to fix.
Okay, I see a
I
thumbs
think
up
Yotam
there.
has helpers, which is always a treat.
Yes, indeed. I just quietly.
Yeah.
muted
Sorry
you.
about that.
No, not
No
at all,
problem.
man. I love
I
it.
hope you didn't take offense, but I quickly muted you because
No, you're good.
it sounded like you were being distracted.
Yeah. Two of my kids and one that isn't even mine. So yeah.
Awesome. Put them on the meeting. They can contribute. It'd be great.
Maybe next
Success already there, Josh.
That's right. Start them young. That's right.
Right.
Cool. So anyway, this is, like I said, this is just something I'm working on. If people want to help, great. If not, that's great too.
Okay.
I got nothing else. Does anyone have anything they want to bring up in the couple of minutes we have left? If not, we can escape. All right, I guess one thing I just looked at, there's the next meeting is during the OpenSSF or the Linux Foundation Open Source Summit. So obviously that'll be canceled. And the one after that is July 5th, which like I'm out of town for, and I bet a lot of people will be. So we'll sort that out with probably Jory at some point. But all right. I wish you all a marvelous day.
Likewise.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Right, take care.
Bye all. Thanks.